In Canberra, in diplomatic circles, there is no bigger name and no bigger interview than this man. In these imposing grounds, in these grand rooms, he and his staff are at the centre of a storm. This is rare access, rarely granted. I'm standing on Chinese sovereign territory, right in the heart of Canberra, where the ambassador, Xiao has invited me in for a frank discussion about the China-Australia relationship.
What an entrance.
I'm Tim Harcourt, and welcome to this special edition of The Bigger Picture.
Yep.
That's it.
There it is, and action.
It's no secret that relations recently have been rocky.
Well done.
Homecoming is the next Oscar winner.
That's right.
All right. Should I put it here or?
Ambassador Qian has been handpicked by China for a reason. He wants to calm the troubled waters and rebuild the bilateral relationship. And he's in it for the long haul. So, Ambassador, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks. It's good to be here.
So, 50 years of the anniversary, Australia recognising China, one of the first nations to do so. It's an exciting time for Australia-China relations.
Absolutely. We have difference, but we can manage differences in a constructive manner as well. So along that line, I have reason to be optimistic. We could have a much, much better future in the coming year or years, or even another 5 decades. I'm relatively still new here. I've been here for 10 months, but I'm trying to learn about this great country, about a great relationship between two countries. And if we look at the past 5 decades, it's been a successful story of friendship and cooperation. So it's already soundly proven that this is a relationship to the benefits of both countries and to our two peoples. So I have reason to believe we can continue to be so in the future.
President Xi and Prime Minister Albanese met recently, a significant development. Do you expect them to meet more, or do you think that you as ambassador will now have to do the hard work?
Well, first of all, it's very important for the leader of our two countries to keep in touch with each other. Ever since Labour came to power after the recent election, federal election, there have been communications at the top level. Exchange of messages of congratulations, and then face-to-face meetings between defense ministers and foreign ministers, and there are also contacts at various other levels. And that paved the way for the top-level meeting that happened in Bali between President Xi and Prime Minister Albanese. That was very significant that we have such a very successful, positive, and top-level dialogue. As ambassador, I'd love to see more such kind of contacts.
The ambassador has lived in the US and studied American literature. He's a man who understands the complexity of language and chooses his words carefully. So, when he talks about a reset in relations between China and Australia, it's well worth listening. I know you're a fan of American literature. You did your graduate school on American and British literature. I know you like Jack London and Ernest Hemingway, The Man of the Sea. A story of perseverance. I mean, do you see the relationship over 50 years as one of perseverance? And is that your model for being ambassador?
Well, when I was in university, my major was language and literature. But indeed, yes, I like The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. It's a tough life for individual, lonely, but he successfully brought the fish back to home. And when I think about the relationship between China and Australia, especially for the past couple of years, we were in a difficult period of time. I think I should be confident enough and resilient enough that I'll try to be helpful as ambassador to play my role to bring our relationship back onto the right track. And I think I can achieve that. With the help and the efforts from both sides. I mean, it's not an easy job. It's realistically speaking, there are different views. I mean, in this country, when we look at China and look at China's domestic policies, foreign policies, and China's policy towards Australia. There are people talking about China has changed, China is assertive, China is invasive, China is bullying others, blah, 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 all this kind of things. And when I talk to all those people, I realize that there are many occasions where our Australian colleagues, there's a misunderstanding. They do not know exactly what it is, but they've been influenced by other resources. So my role is to consistently try my best to communicate, to share with them what is really the facts, what is really the history, what is really the truth, so for them to make their own decisions about their view of China.
So what would be your message to Australians? We're right here in an interview and you can look at me and tell me what is your message to Australians not affected by the noise around us?
Well, I think once we have a more communications between Australians and the Chinese, by and by people will realize that China and Australia, we have been friendly countries, we have been partners, we have been cooperative with each other for several decades, and there's reason for us to continue to be so. And secondly, a lot of changes have happened in China, and that's the basic right of a nation who wants to raise the living standard of its own people. This legitimate right. That does not mean that China's foreign policy has changed. It doesn't mean China's friendly policy towards Australia has changed. And China is always ready to develop a friendly relation with Australia. I'm ambassador here to seek friends, and we want to be make friends with Australia. We can, when we should be friends, partners, instead of adversaries and foes. And thirdly, it may take some time for people from both sides to understand each other.
So, as an ambassador, you see your role to help shape public opinion of China in Australia and Australia in China. A lot of people think ambassadors are secret and they're deal makers, but you see your role is quite public in influencing public opinion.
Well, Tim, to be honest, I think my role is to share my story about China, about our people, our culture, our history, and our policies. It's for the Australian people to make their own views about China. And in my view, ambassador is just like a bridge linking the two nations, linking the two peoples, and trying to promote understanding, friendship, and cooperation. And I'm going to try to do that.
Hey, Don, thanks for doing this for us.
No worries.
That's great. I've just been with the Trade Minister, Don Farrell, in the government. You ready, Don? Okay. Well, Minister, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
And we're talking about the tariffs on barley, winemaking and so on from China.
We want to try and remove some of the trade blockages, talking wine, we're talking barley, we're talking meat, and we're talking crayfish.
Now, he thought he can get a resolution with China without having to go to the World Trade Organization.
From the day I took over this job, I made it very clear that we'd prefer an off-ramp to the WTO dispute settling. We'd like to discuss the issue with our Chinese counterparts. So that's our preferred course of action. I know that's the preferred course of action of the Prime Minister.
Do you think there might be some good news coming in terms of those disputes that we had?
Well, if we could solve those disputes bilaterally, I think it's much better than going through the WTO process. It's who knows when it's going to finish, to be honest. But in the first place, it's normal for countries to have different views on certain issues. But I prefer to solve those issues bilaterally. It's more efficient, and perhaps both sides can sit down at the table and share our views and our concerns and our proposals as to how we can address each other's concerns.
And one message also that Minister Don Farrell had was that we talk a lot in the press about disputes and things that are different between China and Australia. But aren't there a lot of things that unite us as two countries? Do you think, I mean, that was Don Farrell's message to you and to the Chinese people? There's more things that unite us than we have disputes on.
Well, Tim, for China and Australia, we're different nations. We're different in so many respects: history, culture, language, religion, even color of the people's skin. There's just natural differences. We're also different in political systems, ideologies. But if you look at over the past 5 decades, even though we have been having such differences, we have been successfully developing a friendly, cooperative relationship. And in my views, there are many, many other areas we have common grounds, we have common interests, and we can cooperate to the benefits of both sides. And that's much larger than the differences we have.
So trade is at the top of the agenda in terms of bilateral relationship.
Well, there are many issues on the table. I think they are equally important.
Well, I see, China has needs in terms of energy, needs in terms of food, of course, and has, as you say, a large middle class that wants a quality education here in Australia. So I think it seems that Australia needs China as the number one trading partner, but there are needs of China for Australia that we can deliver on: agriculture, mining, education, as you say, and technology.
I think it's fair to say we need each other.
China, of course, is our largest trading partner. We do more trade with China than we do with Japan, Korea, or the United States combined.
So given that foundation, we should be confident enough we can continue to do that. And in terms of either the resources, the China needs the iron ore from Australia. We need the lithium material from Australia. Agriculture, we need the barley, wine. So the Australian wine is one of the best wines in the world, and it's very popular in Chinese market. And also the Australian seafood, all this kind of stuff is very popular. And I think it's important that we should work together to put all this kind of cooperation and trade relations back to normal.
A lot of the business people, politicians I've spoken to on this show, before the pandemic went to China a lot. Minister Farrell said to tell you that he would like to lead a trade delegation to China as soon as things open up. If you do lead the delegation, can we bring the crew along and we can film it, Don Farrell in action in
You'll be
China?
most welcome.
Thank you. Would the embassy welcome an Australian trade delegation led by the Trade Minister or the Prime Minister to China next year? Should the health restrictions be sufficient?
Well, I think it's always important for us to have to maintain contacts at various levels, including the top levels. As to where to start with, I haven't received any formal kind of proposal from the Australian government to send a delegation to go to China. But I think perhaps we can start with a working level contacts first to prepare, to pave the way for the possible minister level contacts to discuss our differences and to sort out those disputes on the table. And I think it's a very important part of the job for both sides to sit down and talk about that. As for top level visits at the minister levels, it's always welcome. But I haven't received any formal proposal. I personally would very much encourage if the appropriate and necessary preparation is there. I think it's very important for us to have this kind of contact.
Well, I might give them a reminder to put a proposal to you, and then if you accept, I will take me and the crew with them to film it.
Tim, I can share with you here that in the meeting between President Xi and the Prime Minister Albanese in Bali, there's a discussion about our relationship overall, and there are discussion about the future of our cooperation. And President Xi particularly mentioned about the trade relations. He says, let's work together to create the favorable atmosphere for our investment code relations. Is so important for our two countries.
Because our economies are so complementary, we often talk about the bilateral relationship as win-win between Australia and China. What areas do you think will be the most win-win for Australia and for China?
Well, Tim, I would say that we have a win-win kind of relationship between our two countries in all the possible areas. Political contacts, economic trade, science, education, people-to-people tourism, agriculture, industry, a lot of areas we've been cooperative with each other, and that's been benefiting to both sides. For example, China has been importing iron ore from Australia for a long time. That's been very critical to the industrialization of China over the past several decades. And at the same time, I believe we have also been contributing to the prosperity of Australia as a nation and as Australians as a society. And we've been contributing immensely to the tax, to the revenues, raising the living standard for many people in this country. So indeed, it's a mutually beneficial.
We've just had COP27 climate summit. Do you think climate change and that challenge is a new area of cooperation between China and Australia?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, between China and Australia, we have so many areas we have been cooperating in the past, and we should continue these cooperation in these areas. At the same time, we should explore new frontiers. And climate change is just one of these new frontiers, in my views. We also can think about green energy, think about infrastructure. We've been cooperating very successfully, actually, over the past, at least 1 to 2 decades. The earliest solar pad technology was from New South Wales University.
It was indeed.
Yeah, we commercialized it in China. It's been very successful. And by the way, both Chinese government and the Australian government have good, strong ambition to make further efforts to address the climate change challenges. And that is an area where we can cooperate. And it's good for both sides.
A lot of people talk about Chinese influence in the media, sometimes a positive, sometimes a negative thing. How do you understand Chinese influence in Australia?
Well, first of all, I think as a principle, we when we develop a relation with other countries, we respect each other, and we do not interfere with other countries' internal affairs, and that is our principle guiding our foreign policies. And it is very much so in our relations between China and Australia. We respect Australians to make their own views. For example, I fully respect the Australians to make their own decisions, to choose, is it the Liberal Party or Labour Party to be re-elected, to come back to the power. And that is absolutely a domestic affair of this country. And for example, there are 1.2 billion or 1.4 billion Chinese living in this country. They are naturalized Australian citizens. I fully respect their Australian citizens. I do not make any comment on their choice of the political parties to be voted for, to be elected. And these are domestic affairs, and China has always been strictly respecting. But there's no need for certain Australians to be worried about for the so-called infiltration or other political motives, geopolitical motives. No. For example, the cooperation between some of the Chinese telecommunication companies like Huawei or ZTE, they're just doing normal business, just like they've been doing with other countries as well. And there's no other political motives behind Huawei, or there's no Chinese government motives behind Huawei's relation with this country. So there's absolutely no need for people in this country to have that kind of concern.
Is China champion or challenger? The fact of the matter is China is a participant, a builder, and a contributor to the existing international system. And my feeling is very strong about the hospitality and friendship that Australian people are having towards the Chinese people, towards China. And I also feel very strongly about their expectations for a sound, stable, friendly, and cooperative relationship between two countries.
Now, you're a cosmopolitan fellow who studied British and Australian literature. What's been your view of Australians in your time you've been here? Given that you know America, the UK quite well, is Australia what you expected or very different than the UK and US?
One difference is that Australians are living in the Australian continent, in this part of the world. And this part of the world is neighboring Asian culture, Asian countries. Australians are part of this region. We are all Asia-Pacific nations. And the Chinese people look at Australia not as a European country, as a country in the Asia-Pacific. It's a major power, or one of the major powers in the Asia-Pacific. So I realize that the Australian people are closer to showing your understanding about Asia, about Asian culture, Asian customs, Asian formalities, and all those things. And it's a little subtle difference, but I think it's very important.
That's great, because when I asked President Putin what did he think of Australia, he said, I never think of Australia. So your answer's more comprehensive. What is no longer in doubt is that both China and Australia are thinking a lot about each other and about repairing ties frayed by recent events. There's much to be done, but as Confucius said, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. On the basis of this wide-ranging interview, it's clear that the first step is being taken on the road to improving relations between two proud countries.
China and Australia, we are two nations. We are two independent nations. And China has China's national interest, and Australia does the same, their own interest. But when we put these two countries together, we'll find out there are areas where the two interests overlap with each other. And this is what I call it, the overlapping areas of our common interest. And this is the area where we can cooperate. And there are areas which do not overlap, but these are the area of differences. But in my views, there's no such area between China and Australia that we find it confrontational in nature. There's no such area. So it is my strong belief that we've been cooperating so successfully for the past several decades. And let us be friends, let us be partners rather than adversaries or foes. And let's continue to be good partners. Ausbiz, I watched Ausbiz and I watch your videos. I very much appreciate that you look at the world with a global vision. You are everywhere. You've been in so many countries. You look at different countries with your perspective, but introducing these countries in a very balanced, objective manner. And I appreciate the role that you've been playing in introducing China to this great country. I wish you success and all my best wishes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, for you and your family.
Xiao, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.